Hey guys, Max here, and today we're going to talk about Russia and Ukraine and the war and a little bit about it, but we're also going to look at the economic situation in Russia right now, the impact that sanctions are having on the markets over there and on people in general, and what this might mean for markets in the rest of the world, so let's just get right into it. Now, it being Monday, markets around the world are opening up today after being closed for the weekend, as usual. The big concern here was what might happen to Russian markets in particular as the world opened up after the war in Ukraine escalated and the West started to make real sanctions against Russia. There were also some concerns about Western markets, companies or institutions that might have been exposed to Russia. They might have equities or assets that have exposure to Russia, and no one was really sure what might happen there. Now, early indicators basically said that the damage to Russian markets in particular would be awful, and that most Western markets would be okay, but specific individual companies that had exposure to Russia might suffer. Now, Russia's largest online bank had USD to ruble exchange rates fall from 80 to 1 to 170 to 1 over the weekend, which basically meant that the real rates of currency exchange, i.e. if you actually have rubles and you want to change them into dollars or vice versa, meant that the ruble had lost 50% of its value. That was, however, last night before most markets had opened, and as of right now, some banks are offering an exchange rate of 120 to 1, so still slightly better, but a 40% drop and awful news for Russians. Google Finance has the exchange rate listed at 100 to 1, but to be honest, I can't find any company that is actually offering that rate. Now, this will hugely spike inflation for Russia. Imports overnight will basically instantly become 40% more expensive across the board. Exports supposedly will be cheaper, which is good in theory. It should help the Russian economy, especially for gas and oil exports, but the sanctions put in place by Western countries means that no one can actually import this stuff anyway, so it doesn't help. And for oil and gas sales, those tend to be done on larger scales between countries or billion-dollar companies, and they tend to make agreements on stable currencies like the euro or the dollar, not the ruble, so it's not actually good news either. Now, Russia, the government and the central bank especially, is really scared of inflation right now, so overnight they rose interest rates by 10% and it's now sitting at 20%, twice what it was a week ago. This is supposedly to slow down the economy, to make financing more expensive for Russian people and businesses, and to try and stop demand spiraling, leading to crazy high inflation, because in reality, hyperinflation is actually on the cards as a possibility here, though not quite a probability. Now, the Russian people here are understandably very worried as well. There are loads of videos of queues at ATMs in various cities around the country, cash points basically, as people want their cash, they want to get them out of the banks. It was pretty clear that a bank run was going to happen, and that would absolutely cripple faith in the financial markets in Russia, so the government limited each person to only being able to take out $20 worth of rubles per day. Now, that does solve the bank run problem. These banks won't literally run out of cash anymore, but it doesn't allow people to access their money though, and confidence is still awful for the Russian economy. Now, the Russian stock market is predicted to collapse as well. Sanctions have been hitting hard and targeting a lot of independent or supposedly independent companies. Basically, no foreign investment from the West is going to be going into Russia now or anytime soon. Now, some pundits were expecting another market crash in the Russian indexes of about 50% on top of the 40% crash that we already saw last week, so markets were terrified to say the least. In particular, a lot of sanctions have led to some institutions in the West being forced to get rid of their Russian stocks, so they would have to sell at any price because it would be literally illegal for them to keep these Russian companies on the books. Basically, what we would have seen if markets had opened this morning would have been a bloodbath. Every bank, every investor, and every institution with assets or equities in Russia would have had to sell at huge losses, and a massive market crash would have been seen. Overnight though, Russia instructed banks to refuse to sell assets for foreign entities. Basically, if you own Russian stocks and you try to sell it, you either click on the buttons on your brokerage or you literally call them up, they will simply say no, you're not allowed to sell these shares, and frankly that is ridiculous. This is simply a band-aid on a sucking chest wound. It doesn't actually help anyone, it doesn't actually solve any of the problems that Russia is facing, it just hides them for a day. But even that wasn't deemed to be enough. Russia then just decided that markets wouldn't open at all. No buying or selling, no nothing. They shut it down, and I guess the idea here is if you just shut the markets down, then they can't crash if they never open, right? And again, yeah, this has stopped the markets in Russia from crashing, but it's just delayed the inevitable. It isn't a long-term solution, it hasn't solved any problem, and it's utterly crazy, but this is Russia and Putin, so what do you really expect? Now, I am seeing some early reports that Russia may even close their foreign exchange markets down until March the 7th, a full week away from today. Now, this is unconfirmed, but it's possible, and it's on par with other actions taken by Russian regulatory authorities, so I wouldn't be too surprised if it does happen. Basically, Russia is expecting an absolute bloodbath in the markets, and they are panicking. The Kremlin even came out and said that economic reality for Russia has changed. They're aware of how awful and impactful these sanctions are going to be for them, and they're not happy. Now, the big question for a lot of people over here and on my channel has been, will there be pain in the West? And the simple answer is yes, but it will be targeted. BP, for example, is one of the UK's biggest companies. It has a 20% stake in a monstrous Russian gas company, but they've basically been forced to divest that stake. Now, normally they would just sell the shares that they have in that company, but they can't for a number of reasons. Other banks and investors in the West can't buy the shares under the sanctions that have just been put into place, and Russians can't buy the shares either with markets shut down, and even if they could, well, no one in Russia has the money to buy that either. What we might be seeing here is BP having to book a 100% loss on this investment, costing them $25 billion, and they'll lose 3% of all of their future revenues as well, as that comes from this stake in that company. Basically, this is a pretty huge hit for BP, and it was down 7% at its lowest point today, and about 6% right now as I make this video. What we're seeing across the board is that economic sanctions that are hitting Russia, they are really, really impactful, and Putin and the Russian government as a whole is starting to worry about it. What about the war itself though? What actually happened over the last day? Well, lots of the same. Russian attacks on Kyiv, Kharkiv and Cherniv continued overnight, and many more Russians were killed and many more vehicles and equipment was lost or destroyed on the Russian side, but no real progress was actually made in these cities. There was a lot of news going around that Kyiv was surrounded yesterday, but it turned out to be misinformation by Russians trying to panic the defenders, and the city is actually fine. Kharkiv again had some very heavy fighting. It is a major target for the Russians, and it's been attacked by loads of missiles, but the Russians haven't actually managed to take any control over the city itself. What we are seeing though is the Russians start to bomb residential areas with missiles and rockets and things like that, and you might try and give the Russian army the benefit of the doubt here, but the video evidence sort of speaks for itself, and it's pretty clear that they're not targeting the military. Many civilians have been killed over the last day, and that death toll is starting to rack up. Now, information for all of that is on my Twitter if you want to stay up to date with it, along with video evidence of these attacks, so if you do doubt that, then check it out. Basically though, in the north and the east of the country, in those invasions, there has been no more progress for the Russian army. The Russians are incapable of defeating the Ukrainian forces, and they are holding these strong points very effectively. There is a little bit of concern about a huge 10-kilometer long convoy of Russian forces outside of Kyiv. Basically, loads of reinforcements, manpower, weapons, equipment, fuel apparently as well, but these forces haven't actually joined the fray yet, though a major assault on Kyiv may be coming soon. Now, south of Ukraine in the invasion that came from Crimea, that's been far more successful. Lots of land has been taken. Berdyansk was taken by Russian forces yesterday, but mostly without resistance. There just weren't many Ukrainian forces there to defend the town, and really there's just unarmed civilians in the city. The Russians are also putting pressure on Kherson, Mykolaiv and Melitopol, three big population centers in the path of that southern push. It is unclear as of yet how strong Ukrainian resistance will be in these cities, but if it's anything like Kiev or Kharkiv, then Russians are probably going to start to struggle on this front now. Again, this southern push has seen a lot more success than the northern or eastern ones, mostly without much resistance though. If their success is due to their own operations, maybe they're just better trained or better equipped or better supplied troops, then they will continue to expand. But if their success is due to the lack of the opposition, then it may start to grind to a halt here, as they are starting to run into Ukrainian army. As for losses, well, numbers are starting to go up quite a lot, and the most up-to-date figures we have right now is 5,300 killed for Russia, and that is coming from the Ukrainian armed forces. Now, this number is being disputed a lot. Every time I've spoken about it in the past, I've made the caveat that it does seem slightly inflated, and it's very difficult to know how many enemy you killed, and there is actually a development on this front. There might be an explanation as to why this number is so large, and it could be mistranslations and just confusions. Maybe this number from Ukraine means Russian forces killed, captured, or incapacitated all grouped together, and that would make much more sense. If that is the case, then expect somewhere in the region of about 1,500 Russians actually killed. Still a huge number, but not quite 5,000. Probably 3,000 or so wounded, and definitely over 200 captured, and maybe even 300 by this point. Now, material losses are far more accurate, and as of right now, the Ukrainian army and their armed forces have destroyed 29 Russian planes, 29 helicopters, 191 tanks, 74 artillery pieces, over 800 armoured vehicles, about 300 cars and 60 fuel tankers, and then a bunch of other things as well. Some Grad launchers, missile launchers, some drones, little bits like that. Now, we aren't really sure about Ukrainian casualties, but as of right now, there are at least 350 civilians killed and 2,000 wounded. In terms of Ukrainian combatants, again, the number isn't quite public, but it's probably looking like in excess of 300 soldiers killed as of yet. Ukraine isn't publicizing this info as they don't really want to give this information to Russia. They're trying to keep them in the dark. Now, what we are seeing and what is a little bit worrying is Russia changing their tactics because they are basically incapable of defeating Ukrainian forces. The gains they've actually made basically amounts to villages and countryside that isn't defended. As for population centers, Russia has been doing far, far worse. Yesterday, Putin started to threaten nuclear war on the West, and Russia has now placed their nuclear forces on higher alert status, trying to bluff the West out of supporting Ukraine. They've also escalated the conflict with thermobaric weapons, MOS-1s, which are mobile rocket launchers but use these thermobaric ammunitions. They are very devastating. They've been seen all over Ukraine, and they were used in Kharkov last night. And last night there was an unknown, unexplained, huge explosion near Kyiv, which could have been a thermobaric bomb as well. The Russian forces are also starting to target civilians with their artillery and their rockets. Russia is clearly now making no distinction between military targets and civilian targets and population centers, and they are firing loads of unguided rockets into cities, killing civilians. Now again, as I said earlier, there is video footage of this, and it is on my Twitter for anyone who wants to see that. For anyone who doubts what I'm saying, please check it out. It is very, very real. In short, Putin is escalating this conflict to try and find an advantage because he isn't seeing the success that he expected here. Now, negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are ongoing, but we're not sure if any progress is actually being made. There are unconfirmed reports that Ukraine is bolstered by their successes, and they are asking for no less than the complete Russian withdrawal from all of Ukraine, including Donbass and Crimea. Now, this is unclear and it's not confirmed, to be fair, but if that is their stance, then they're probably very confident that they can continue to hold out against Russia. Now, one very little thing, Vasily Lomachenko, an incredibly talented boxer who is from Ukraine, has taken up arms, and it's very good to see. Hopefully he and everyone else taking up arms in Ukraine to fight against Russia is able to stay safe and return back home at some point in the future. If you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and a comment to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio, and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. It's completely free to sign up, you don't have to buy anything, you don't have to hand over any card information, so if that sounds interesting, then make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you get from any savings account these days. Just make sure not to use Tether. Thank you all for the support, thanks for watching, stay stoic, until next time.